There are some seasons of life where it feels like grief and responsibility keep stacking on top of each other, with no time to breathe. Maybe you're parenting a child with complex needs, advocating in the medical systems, holding a family together, and then illness, loss, or a toxic relationship arrives on top of all of that. From the outside, people see you coping. On the inside, you might feel like you're quietly disappearing. For many women and carers, the mix of caregiving, financial stress, and emotional abuse can feel impossible to name, let alone leave, especially when you're the one everyone else relies on. Today's conversation is for you if you're a special needs parent holding more than most know, you're grieving a partner or a life you thought you'd have, or you're starting to realize a relationship is eroding your safety, sanity, and sense of self. My guest is Julie Barth, writer, mother of 6, trauma survivor, and founder of the Colin James Barth Outreach, a nonprofit supporting women-led households in crisis. Her memoir, Notes from a Blackberry, chronicles her journey as a special needs parent through her first husband's battle with cancer and the years of emotional and financial abuse that followed in a second relationship. Through her charity and writing, Julie helps women in crisis, understanding that leaving isn't just possible, it's necessary. Today, we're talking about grief, special needs parenting, emotional abuse, and what it really looks like to move from surviving to reclaiming your life. Julie, I'd love to welcome you to Radiant Moments.
Thank you for having me. Hi, Michelle.
Hi. Julie, before we talk about the red flags and the resources, I'd love to really get grounded and find out about your story so listeners understand how all of these different threads come together. For listeners meeting you for the first time, can you share a little bit about your family and the early chapters of your journey, becoming a mum, your daughter's diagnosis, and your first husband's illness?
Sure. I met my first husband in grammar school. I moved to a different town. He was like really the first person that I remember. We were in 3rd grade. He was my first kiss, and we parted ways for many years, met back together up in a bar, and I found something I'd been missing that I didn't even know. And we quickly, I mean, when I say quickly, I think it was within, a month to 2 months, decided to move in together. I always tell the story that when I was in 3rd grade, I can remember writing Julie Barth, Julie Barth. Of course, that wasn't my name back then, but for some reason, it was almost like it was written in the stars that we were supposed to be together. And we had our first son and lived downtown Chicago. And we decided that, he needed a greener space and ended up moving back to the same suburbs that we were from. And I always wanted a big family. So we quickly got to work trying to have more children. We suffered through 2 miscarriages and then got pregnant with my second child. Her name is Tatum. And right from the get-go, she just stopped growing. So I would go in and they were like, congratulations, you're 6 weeks pregnant. 10 weeks, congratulations, you're 6 weeks pregnant. And by 12 weeks, they were still measuring about 6 to 7 weeks. And it was in 2001. So part of it I probably could say was measurement error and technology, but something started to not add up. And over the course of my pregnancy with her, I think I had 40 some ultrasounds. They kept throwing things out. First, it was that she, had trisomy 18, and then we had her chromosomes checked and it wasn't. And then it was, oh, she's got a syndrome. She's going to come out and not be able to breathe. And so it was just literally one fiasco after another. And when you're pregnant, there are no answers and you're just waiting for this creature to come out so you can really just get your eyes on it. So about 37 weeks, probably more for my benefit than for hers, they just decided to deliver. The minute that they induced me, everything kicked into high gear and the placenta was wrapped around her foot and she crashed. And when she came out, unfortunately, she was only 3 pounds. We thought she was going to be about 5 and she was full term. So the intubation stuff that they used to keep her alive damaged her throat really severely, which led to over a year of being in the NICU and traveling the United States and really just trying to figure out what was going on. As the months proceeded, we kind of felt like, oh, she'll just, snack back. And everybody says to you when you're in the NICU, oh, someday you won't even notice. And I was living with that, with that intention. And so the more specialists we saw, the more, instead of addressing what was going on in the malpractice that happened, because a lot of it was hid, they're always looking for the global what's wrong with Tatum. And I was more, let's just, first of all, figure out if she's going to be here. Second of all, fix what we can. And, they would just say oh, she's going to have special needs. And, but yet I didn't know what that was. So really for 2 years, it was just this like question mark of what are we dealing with? What are we and although she was progressing and doing great, um, I think at a year old, she was only 8 pounds and she was about this big and running around with 0 to 3 month shoes. So she was walking on time. She was doing everything she could, but she had a trach because of the damage on her throat, and we had all these surgeries. When she was about 2, things started to kind of fall in line. And I was at the store with her a couple times, and I had random people coming up to me and saying, "Is your daughter the one in that Discovery Channel show?" And I had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. Again, this is in 2001, and there was no Google, and rare genetic diseases back then were all in a book. So you would go see a specialist, and they were literally like, flipping through them thinking this is so rare and, oh, she looks like this because nothing was up in her chromosomes. But my best friend called and said, I think I know what Tatum has. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad you do because, all these specialists. And sure enough, she said she has primordial dwarfism and AOL was just coming to light. So I punched it in on the computer and I mean, everything came up. Like it explained her, everything besides all of the problems at birth that were medically related. And so my husband came home from work. His name was Colin, and he was a trader down at the Board of Trade. And I was devastated. And I was like, come here, come here, come here. And I sat him down and, and he just kind of looked at the computer and he said, okay, what's for dinner? And I was like, what do you mean, what's for dinner? Like, I'm devastated. She has this. And he just kind of looked at me and he said, did you really think that nothing was wrong? Like that she was going to be completely like normal? And I was like, yeah, I really did. I think as a mom, you can guess it away. You can explain it. I used to get out pictures and say, oh, well, her grandma had a really small head. And so it was at that point that we knew what we were dealing with. And, it was an adjustment. But really, in that moment when he said that, it was like, that's what he was always good at doing was like putting it into perspective. Like nothing's changed. Don't change how you feel about her or your expectations for her, what we want for her life, just because someone has now put a label on what we've been dealing with now for, 2-3 years. So life just kind of got back to normal. And anytime they said she couldn't do something, she was up and at it. She was meeting all of her milestones. And although just, everywhere we went, people were looking at her because she is primordial dwarfism is a type of dwarfism where they're proportionately 100% like everyone else, but they're just like, it's like a teacup animal that like they look, exactly how they should. They're just like miniature versions. So, probably with everyone's chagrin, I decided to get back on track because I wanted a very large family. And we proceeded to have 2 more children, and everything was great. I felt as if I finally had the life I always wanted. I always wanted a big family, lots of chaos, and to be a, member of the community. Colin was an amazing dad. He was, coaching, and we just always had so much like fun in our house, even though Tatum was different. We just had so much support of the community and we just all accepted her in fact, I think we all forgot that she did have special needs. So we had 4. And when my youngest was about 6 months and my oldest was 10 at this time, like I said, Colin was a trader down at the Board of Trade and he just started like pulling away and where we were like, connected at the hip. And it was like, we had the same thoughts. He was just very reserved and he just wasn't himself at all. And I knew that work was extremely stressful. So he was back and forth to the doctor and they were throwing antacids at him and, and I think that, there is that medical feel that men, get dismissed very easily and, suck it up and don't complain. And so after about 6 months of that, we were having this huge Halloween party. And I mean, like 300 people. I finally said to him, like, I need you back. I don't know what's going on with you. I don't know what you're dealing with, but you just go to the hospital and insist. Don't leave until they've figured it all out. And being the good wife that I was, I just said I was going to run errands while that all went on. But I finally called him about 3 hours later and I said, well, what's going on? And he was really out of it. And I just felt this urgency to get to the hospital. And I was probably all the way across town and I just almost like remember speeding to get there. I just had this like, I need to get there. And he hadn't said anything, but there was something eating at me. So walked in the door to the hospital and he was just sitting up in bed, kind of, forlorn. And I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, He said this attending physician just came in and he said that found something that he wasn't expecting, but his beeper went off and he said he'd be right back. And just the timing on it, you always think things happen the way they do. By the time the surgeon or the attending came back in, he said, we weren't expecting it, but we found a tumor on your pancreas and several lesions on your liver. And we're not really sure, but we are presuming that it's cancer. So at that point, just kind of everything fell apart. It's amazing how in 1 second your entire life can just shift and everything you know is gone. And all the problems that you thought you had 5 minutes earlier, you wish were your problems now. And that's kind of what happened from that moment on. 2 days later, we found out that they said he had 2 weeks to live, take him home, let him say goodbye to his children. I think probably because of everything that I had been through with Tatum, I kind of was like, no, that's not how this is going down. And his mother at the time was one of the oldest surviving ovarian cancer patients in the United States. And she had lived nearly 20 years. So we kind of had the same hopes for him. Unfortunately, he was in a trial and doing really well, and he just wasn't. And again, overnight, we went from being the star patient who was proving that this therapy was working to being kicked out of the study literally overnight. And that was kind of the beginning of the end.
Very difficult journey to take part in, especially with little ones where you have no idea what's going on. The feel of hopelessness when you don't have control over those experiences, especially when doctors don't know what they're doing, when they don't know what it is, when they can't take more time than a moment to do more research. It's really difficult, and there are so many emotions that caregivers and our loved ones go through: grief, anger, bewilderment,
Confusion, frustration.
That's
Yeah.
right. It's like this long list of things that we were not anticipating on having to experience, and then not having the space to process, deal with, because you're just rolling one appointment after the other, or one treatment, or investigating behind the scenes and trying to hold smile on your face. We're good, we're fine, we're managing, when really not managing, don't know what I'm doing. And I'm wondering, after finding out about your daughter's diagnosis and your husband's diagnosis, what did life look like in that season of being a special needs parent while navigating your husband's cancer, practically and emotionally, when we have that understanding as carers of how heavy that is for us and our ones we love?
I would say that, I'm a believer that there's always something positive to be found. It's just sometimes it's harder to find it. I would say when Colin got sick, I did have those 4 children. And although Tatum had been the focus for almost, I think she was 5 or 6 when he was diagnosed, it was almost as if the universe gave me a break, because whatever I was dealing with her almost shifted, like, okay, now you're fine and I have to go here. And I think there was obviously the worry in the back of my head that I was going to miss out on something that was going on with Tatum because I was so immersed in Colin. But I will say that in that season, Tatum thrived because there was no micromanaging of her anymore. She was no longer the focus. We weren't picking her apart. We weren't trying to make her better. Her therapies shortened. She was able to really just live and be without this constant need to fix her. So it was almost like this ramped up, this went down. And for whatever reason, in the first couple of years of her life, I spent at least a month out of every other month in the hospital with pneumonia and saving her life. And it was almost like I shifted gears to taking care of him, and she got a reprieve. And maybe she didn't. Maybe that was my perception of things, because you have to tend to whatever needs you're focused most at that point. I don't remember being overwhelmed, probably because I didn't even have the time to think about what was going on. I just was putting fires out and remember trying to keep the kids occupied so they didn't know what was going on with Colin, trying to keep Colin in his space so that the kids weren't bothering him. So I don't know that I had a rational or a decision made consciously in probably, I would say 5 years between trying to save Tatum's life and trying to save Colin's life. There was no me. I was a machine. I was just doing what I needed to do to get to the end of the day, to fall asleep and start all over again and try and make it through the day with everyone surviving. And at the forefront of everything was trying to normalize my children's childhood. I never wanted their childhood to be riddled with Tatum's illness and then Colin's illness, and to miss out at some point in their adult lives and think, gosh, I didn't even have a childhood. And I can honestly say, to whatever credit, and maybe because there were so many of them, I don't get that impression with them. So if there's a positive that I can take out of it, for whatever dancing I did and the way that the community around me helped me, they made it through pretty well. We all kind of did.
That's beautiful. Community is so important in a caregiver's life. And I think you're right. When you're in it, there's not really the space to acknowledge the emotions, because you do have to hold it all together, because you have all of these moving parts that require your attention. And if you fell apart, I always had the fear that I wouldn't be able to put myself back together when we were going through those hard times where you didn't know and it was uncertain, and you're meant to protect them and you didn't feel like you were protecting them because they were being jabbed with needles or had IVs in or whatever it might be. And without that community, someone bringing you a meal, someone helping you transport to an activity, or it makes life so much more challenging. And particularly when early on, not realizing that it was okay to ask for help. It was okay to say, I need you to step in for a minute. And it was that permission. And I didn't realize I felt guilty that I was
I
meant
can
to be the one
honestly,
doing it.
I can honestly say that I didn't let people help. For you, you said that if you didn't hold it all together, my thing was, if I didn't maintain control over all of it, and when I say all of it, grocery, kids, if I let somebody into a little piece of it, then it was all going to fall apart. I needed to handle all of it, and I couldn't rely on anyone because, God forbid, they missed just a step. And I just felt like everything was working only because I wasn't letting anyone in. Looking back on it, I didn't want people to help. And I didn't want people in my home because I didn't want them to know how bad it truly was for me. Because the look of pity, I think, for me has always been very difficult. I don't want people to pity me. I don't want them sorry for me to feel as if my life is somehow tragic or less enjoyable. So keeping people at a distance was the way, because if I saw it in their face, then I had to acknowledge it. And I didn't want to acknowledge it. I wanted to believe, just like with Tatum, everything was normal and everything was nice. And I was able to live under that guise as long as nobody unveiled that curtain.
And I have to say, it was until my son had aneurysm rupture in his brain that I was actually able to go. I had other children all over the place and there was just no way. And so when I was younger and starting out doing all of this process, I was afraid that the judgment also of, you should have this together. You decided to have this child. This was what you wanted to do. And so you should be able to manage this. And you're right. Pity was definitely something I didn't want. And it wasn't until my body almost fell apart that I was like, I need to stop that. And I actually had to go and see a counselor to help me to work through that, because I found it really hard. I just even found it hard when someone said, can I do something for you? I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of, people ask me all the time, like, if someone is suffering in your world, what should you do? And my answer to them is, never ask what you can do to help, because that almost puts more stress on someone to come up with something. And if I don't come up with something, but I don't want to come up with all those things, and if I let them, then I'm going to owe them. So I always say, don't ask, just do. If you see them struggling, because if somebody does it, first of all, you're not asking. Second of all, you're not indebted because you didn't ask for it. And third of all, you don't have to feel guilty because you didn't, it just happened and it's done and you're good about it. There wasn't the anticipation of asking and waiting for it to happen. They just did it. So I completely can empathize with what you're saying.
Yes,
That's a
I
very
agree
stressful
with you.
question.
Because it is extremely stressful, especially if you're in crisis mode or you're in hospital. I've got no brain power for my hospital filing cabinet is open, and every single medication and every time we've been in hospital and everything is open in my brain. I don't have capacity to then even process the request. And then I feel bad because I've had to dismiss them because I just got nothing. So I 100% agree that if you see that your loved one is struggling in their caregiving responsibilities, just show up with a coffee. Don't ask. If you know they
I
don't drink
always say,
coffee,
like,
show up with a tea.
yeah, say, I'm going to the grocery store. I'm bringing something. What is it that you want? Or
Yeah.
I'll just bring you something. So I'm planning dinner. If you have something cooking, do it tomorrow.
So when you look back now, where do you see yourself simply surviving and not having the chance to unpack how hurt or guilt or trauma impacted your journey as you started to find your feet?
I can honestly say I'm still finding it, which is bizarre, just as a timeline. This all happened over 17 years ago. I lost Colin 17 years ago. So Tatum, she's going to be 25. I'm really just now getting to the point where I'm acknowledging, I'm stopping, I'm allowing myself to feel things because it was so painful that I couldn't, the gravity of it, like you said, if I let any of it in, I don't think I would have survived. After we lost Colin in 2009, and after I lost him, there is caregivers, they suffer many different stages of grief. And it's almost as if everybody thinks they know it because they've heard of it or they've read about it. But actually, the book was actually written for terminally ill patients, which I don't know if many people know that. And it's the grief stages that the terminally ill patient goes through to accept dying. And, for a caregiver, you're not only going through the stages with them, but then after they pass, you start all over again in a different capacity. So after he passed, it was like people in our community were just beginning to grieve. And I had sat in it for 16 months, losing a piece of him every single day. And although they were finally coming to the table, I was done. I couldn't sit in it anymore, be with them in the grief. And so I just decided that I was going to pick up, leave it all behind. And where I felt as if I had lost a decade of my life caregiving to Tatum and to Colin, I wanted to just get on with it and start over and have a family that I had always dreamed of. And so I met a gentleman who was working in my home, and he was 10 years younger than me. And it seemed like the perfect solution. I'll just leave town with him and my 4 children, have more and just not be me anymore. When I introduced myself to someone, oh, I'm sorry, like immediately, Julie Barth, and that pity and I couldn't live in that world. So again, I'm just now, after remarrying, going through that, coming out the other end, I'm finally allowing myself to kind of almost go back and really kind of identify what the truth is and what really happened and how it unfolded. Because I was just going through the motions, and whatever it was that I wanted, I was going to ignore everything else to get it.
Because facing it is a really hard thing to do.
It
Stopping
is.
and looking internally and sometimes like replaying what happened to be able to process it. It's monumental. It's not just a little blip in a moment. It can take months or years sometimes to be able to look at it and it not have the impact it used to have. And I know that you later found yourself, like you were talking about, in that second relationship that brought a very different kind of relationship to you. Without going into anything that feels unsafe to share, what would you want listeners to know about that transition from being a widow and a caregiver into that next chapter?
I think the most difficult part for me was that I knew about survivor's guilt. But to me, survivor's guilt was always like twin towers. Someone makes it up the stairs. It's a crisis situation where you somehow make it out and someone else doesn't. I didn't recognize that it happens for caregivers. And Colin survived 16 terrible months, really. He had a couple good times, but on the whole, it led to me lying to him on a daily basis about, say, oh, we're going to chemo. Oh, yeah, we're going, knowing full well we weren't. And I had really saved Tatum. She probably died in front of me, revived her. And I'd had some really tough challenges with her. And I think that as Colin got more and more ill, his ability to really see things and reason kind of went out the back. And so he started really looking to me and believing that I could save him and that I was going to cure him. And when somebody believes in you that much, you start believing it. So when he passed, I didn't even recognize how much I truly just disliked myself. I felt guilty for lying to him. I felt guilty for wishing him not there anymore, because you don't want to see them suffer, but then they're gone and you're like, how could I wish my best friend not to be here anymore? But these are all things that you don't consciously know you're even doing. So when I got into my second relationship with, my second husband was extremely mean. He was brutal. He was emotionally abusive to me and to my children. But when he would say things to me like "nobody likes you" or whatever, it was a constant beat down. I felt as if he was right. It was almost like he could see what I saw in myself, because whereas everyone else was saying, "Oh, you're so brave. Look at you." I thought, if you had any idea how not brave I feel, or what I am truly thinking, or how I feel, and the ugly thoughts I've had. Because even if you're not saying them out loud, you're internally saying them and you hear them. So everything that he did and the way that he treated me and the way he manipulated me, it was almost cathartic. It felt like I deserved it. And I internalized that as well, as if it was something lacking in me and I was broken. And clearly I was crazy that all these things were happening. It couldn't be anyone else. So it really led into a decade of letting somebody mistreat me because I never processed what was going on unconsciously in that moment.
And you didn't realize in the moments what it really was, because you were feeling so down on about yourself as well, and not understanding. And if you were a person on the outside looking into your relationship, you'd probably pick it up pretty
Yeah. I
quickly.
think that there's a person that didn't see it. In fact, in these kinds of relationships, it's embarrassing. You don't want people to know how ugly things really are. And once they start getting a glimpse into it and really seeing the cycle and the craziness of what you're saying, and they call you out about it, you push back and you push away and you cut ties with those people, because if you acknowledge that they're right, then you're forced to act on it. So the more people tried to say, I don't know, this is the best decision for you. You should slow down. I don't know what you should grieve. And I was like, nope, 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 nope. And the more that they tried to get me to slow down, the more I continually just made cuts. Like, nope, I don't want to listen to you. I don't want to listen to you, because it was easier for me to have a plan and think it was going to go well than to acknowledge that it might not. And this wasn't a good choice, because then that just led to even more embarrassing, like, oh my gosh, how could I get myself in this position?
Yes. And I think that's part of why it's hard. And also in those moments, you're like, oh, but in this moment, it's great. We have good moments, and you're finding those pockets, because then you can be like, oh, it's okay. There's those good pockets, and everyone has challenging times. And I think it's really hard when you're living in that season where abuse is a big part of your relationship, to hear it from somebody else, because you shouldn't feel this crappy. You shouldn't feel like you're less than. But in the moment, you're like, I don't have any other options. But we're great in these times. We can have good conversations, and you come up with the parts of it, because the reality is, when they tell you that nobody else will love you, or you're the worst person in the world, or sorry,
Yeah.
or that you're defective, basically, that there's something wrong with you as a person, because you have this level of constant narration that you're worthless. And at
Yeah.
times it's really hard to then hear somebody, a loved one, say, hey, I can see that this is not working. Are you aware how much he's like hurting you and stuff? And how much that's impacting you? I don't recognize you. You're becoming a shell of who you were. Those things are really hard to hear and to balance when
Yeah.
you're dealing with someone who is abusive. And so I wanted to thank you for sharing that so openly, because I know many people listening will recognize that pattern of just keeping going, putting one foot in front of the other, because there's no obvious space to fall apart. There's no
Yeah.
grace that you can give yourself, because I always felt if I gave myself that space, all of the things around me would fall apart, because how can you keep going and face that grief, that guilt, that trauma without having months and months of time to to. And
Yeah.
you've lived through all of these layers of caregiving, of grief, as a special needs parent, as a wife losing a partner, as a woman absorbing a lot of emotional impact with very little room to process. I'd love to stay with that for just a moment because so many carers will see themselves here in this conversation. Unique challenges do parents of children with special needs or rare conditions face, both emotionally and logically, that people often don't see?
I don't think that they understand the all-encompassing nature of it. You have specialists, you have occupational therapists, you have physical therapists. Just the act of getting out the door, they don't see the packing up, they see you get out the door, but they don't know all the things that came before it, all things that came after it. And I think that one of the hardest parts for me was always feeling, again, the pity, but also almost feeling as if people thought that I didn't acknowledge that something was wrong with Tatum, or that I was living under this cloud that all these things weren't going on, because everybody dances around it. No one wants to talk about the elephant in the middle of the room. Tatum had a trach, so she would have to be suctioned, and we'd have the suction machine, and then we'd have the G-tube. But special needs parents don't like to stand out either. And we don't, and I'm speaking for myself, I didn't like feeling that I no longer belonged in the normal world. It was almost like you couldn't go to a park with your you almost had to go to the special needs park because you didn't fit in with I hate the word normal, but I'm going to use it. The normal child park where people are running around. I don't think that they truly understand how isolating it is, because you're trying so hard to pretend you're not isolated. You're trying so hard to pretend like it doesn't matter. I don't care. They can do anything your child can do, and I'm good with it, and I'm good with me. Are you? Yeah. But of course, there's still that part of you that wishes that you didn't have all these things, that you wish that you weren't saddled or burdened. And then you feel guilty for feeling burdened because you're watching your child suffer and you think, how selfish am I that I'm worried about not being able to go out on Saturday night because I have to take care of my child who's bedridden. That makes me a terrible person, that I am resentful of this child who I lost my decade of my life. And you rarely talk about those things. I have 2 girls in middle school right now, and Tatum still lives with us. I think for the first time ever in her entire 25 years that I finally just said to one of my girls, I don't think Tatum recognizes how hard it is for me. And when that came out my mouth, I wanted to grab it back in. Like, how dare you feel bad for you when you see your child suffering? But it's hard. And then it's guilt-ridden, and then you feel shame for feeling those feelings. And then you're right back at it, doing whatever you have to do. And I think the other part is I think nobody judges your child as harshly as you do. I say that not because I judged her, because I cared what people thought about her. I cared that she would care what people thought of her. And I know that that seems like brutality, and it might be, but I was so hell-bent on protecting her that I think I was judging her the most harshly because I didn't want anyone to judge her. And that's a really odd cycle of emotions that you're dealing with. It just seems like there's constant feelings of shame and guilt and sorries. I feel like I'm always apologizing. I'm never doing well enough. I don't spend enough time with her. She should be here. She should be here. She should be. And there's always should be's. And you just can't ever live up to it. Even if you were Superwoman, and from the outside, you look very courageous. You look very dedicated. You committed, and you are, but you don't feel it.
I think when you verbalize the internal struggles, you have that moment of, oh my goodness, I just let that slip.
Taboo.
My God.
Taboo.
That's right.
I hope
Because
no one heard me.
That's right, because in society, those hard truths are not accepted. They're frowned upon. And it's not that you love your child less or the person that you're caring for less, but it's a hard role to step into. And it's a massive lifelong marathon. It's not a, hey, we're here for 2 months because we had to have, for example, I had fluid in my ear. I had to get grommets. And after the grommets fell out, I was all good. And so that's a sprint. Whereas when you have somebody with medical complexities, it's not. It can be for the rest of your life.
Well, and you know that the end is never going to be good. And it's always chasing you. It's always chasing you. And if you don't live it to the maximum, if you don't do everything, and I did this with Colin too, if you don't feel like you did everything possible, which you can't, you always feel like you should have done more. There's always that feeling of I'm letting somebody down. I find it easier to complain about how requiring my teens are and how snotty they are at certain times than I do to just say, like, I don't want to go to another appointment with Tatum. It's okay to complain about your children's behavior when they're normal. Nobody says, like, oh, how can you say that? How could you feel that way? But if they have special needs, then you feel as if you're supposed to be a higher standard, rise above those feelings, be kinder, be gentler, and dismiss your own feelings because you don't matter anymore. Your feelings are not supposed to matter anymore because you're supposed to be selfless. And you are, but there's only so long you can be selfless before resentment. And then, oh God, resentment. How could you resent somebody? Yeah. I mean, so many complex and all at the same time, all
That's right.
intertwined.
And it gets us to the point where, because we like push it down, I'll add that, onto the top as well, that you actually end up burning out. You end up getting to a point where mentally you feel exhausted from the second you wake up to the second you go to bed, and your exhaustion just builds across the day. And so maybe 10 years ago, you woke up and you were at 100%. Now your 100% is like 5. And so you got 5% and you push. So you're constantly digging into an empty cup because you have to keep finding all of this additional energy to make it across the day. And having those hard conversations, the frank conversations, like you were saying, we're going to pause the conversation here for today. In part 1, Julie has taken us through the reality of special needs parenting, the shock of diagnosis, and the kind of grief that keeps moving when life keeps demanding more from you. If you're listening and you feel seen in any of that, the guilt, the exhaustion, the invisible load, please know you are not alone and you're not failing. You're carrying a lot. Next week, in part 2, Julie and I move into much more tender territory, emotional and financial abuse, what it really takes to leave safely, and the first small steps towards stability and support when you're in survival mode. Until then, take a breath, take this gently, and take care of yourself as well.